When I came back from grocery shopping, my mother-in-law had locked me outside. I froze for a second, my arms aching from the weight of the paper bags, sweat dripping down my neck from the afternoon sun. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she didn't hear me pulling into the driveway. Maybe she was upstairs. But then I caught it, the sound of metal, a key turning. Not from my hand, but from the other side of the door. Slow, deliberate, like punctuation at the end of a sentence that had already been written for me. I shifted the bags, knocked once, then twice, louder the second time. "Hello?" I called. No answer. Through the narrow slit of the curtain by the living room window, I saw it. A shadow moving, the faintest ripple in the fabric, as if someone had just peeked and then stepped back. My stomach tightened. My arms began to shake, not from the weight of the groceries, but from the sudden realization. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. The bags slipped from my hands. Apples rolled across the porch, one bouncing down the step into the flower bed. A carton of eggs tilted dangerously, but I caught it at the last second. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For a second, I thought maybe it was my husband calling to let me in. But it wasn't. It was a promotional text from the grocery store about weekend discounts on frozen pizza. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Locked out of my own home. But sure, let me save $1 on pepperoni. I dialed my husband anyway. It rang. Once, twice, then voicemail. My eyes flicked back to the curtain. Still, silent. I pressed the doorbell, the chime echoing inside. And that's when I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. Laughter. Muffled at first, then clearer, as if someone hadn't bothered to hold back anymore. Not kids, not neighbors, adults, my family, inside, enjoying themselves while I stood outside like an unwanted delivery. I sat down on the step, groceries scattered around me. The sun was glaring, pressing down on my skin like punishment. My palms were damp. My heart pounded. Not fast, but heavy, like each beat was making a decision. I wanted to scream, to pound on the door until the wood splintered. But I didn't. I just sat there, outwardly calm, inwardly on fire. I thought about every other time something like this had happened. It started small, like most things do. The first time, it was a dinner. My mother-in-law told me, "Family sits at the main table. You can sit with the kids." I smiled, slid into the tiny chair, knees bent awkwardly under the plastic table, and tried to convince myself it didn't matter. Another time, she forgot to add my name to the Christmas gift exchange. I watched as everyone opened presents, while I sat with an empty lap. "Oh, we didn't think you'd want to be included," she said, her voice dripping with something that sounded polite if you didn't listen too closely. I wanted to believe each slight was isolated. A slip. A misunderstanding. But standing outside that locked door, groceries melting in the heat, I realized it wasn't. This was a pattern. A decision. I was being erased slowly, politely, cruelly. I picked up the bags again, one by one, set them neatly on the porch. The doorbell camera blinked red, recording me, a silent witness to my humiliation. I leaned closer and whispered, just in case she was watching. "I know you're in there." My reflection in the glass stared back, pale and sharp in the sunlight. My hand hovered over the doorknob. Cold metal against hot skin. Useless. Inside, another burst of laughter. A man's voice this time. My husband. I could recognize his laugh anywhere. Short, awkward, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to enjoy himself. And yet, he was laughing. With them. While I stood outside, I swallowed hard. My throat felt raw, even though I hadn't shouted a word. I slid my hand into my purse and pulled out a small silver key. My spare. The one I'd tucked away months ago, after the first time she forgot to leave the door unlocked for me. I turned it slowly, almost tenderly, like I was giving the door one last chance to prove me wrong. It clicked open without resistance. The air inside was cool, almost too cool after the weight of the sun. The smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread hit me immediately. A dinner. A family dinner I hadn't been told about. My bags rustled as I set them down on the kitchen counter. The sound cut through the room like a bell. Every head turned. My husband froze mid-laugh, his fork halfway to his mouth. My sister-in-law looked down at her plate, suddenly fascinated by the peas. My father-in-law cleared his throat, but it was my mother-in-law who held my gaze. She smiled, thin, sharp, almost triumphant, as if she'd expected me to stay outside. As if locking me out was just another chore on her list, no more remarkable than folding laundry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the groceries on the table. I simply placed the carton of eggs down gently, smoothed the paper bag with my hand, and said, "I went grocery shopping for everyone, and when I came back, the door was locked." The silence that followed was thicker than the summer air. My husband's fork clinked against the plate. My mother-in-law's smile faltered, just slightly, like a crack in glass. I picked up my phone, checked the time, and slid it back into my pocket. "Dinner smells good," I added softly, almost kindly. Then I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving them in their perfect little tableau of silence and guilt. What they didn't know, what I didn't even fully realize in that moment, was that the lock they had turned wasn't just on the front door. It was on something much bigger. And once a lock is turned, sometimes it can never be undone. Let me tell you what I thought would happen. I pictured it the way I always did when I left the house on a Saturday afternoon. I would pull into the driveway, arms full of grocery bags, and the front door would swing open before I even reached the steps. My son would be the first one there, bare feet slapping against the hardwood, calling out, "Mom's home," like I had returned from war instead of the supermarket. My husband would follow, slower, with that tired smile he always wore after his mother's long lectures. Maybe he would offer to take one of the heavier bags from me. Maybe not. I never asked for much. In my head, the kitchen smelled like lemon cleaner and fresh coffee. The air conditioning hummed, cool and forgiving after the sweltering heat outside. I imagined myself setting the bags down on the counter, pulling out a carton of orange juice, maybe even sneaking a sip straight from the bottle before anyone noticed. My mother-in-law would be sitting at the table, pretending not to judge the brand of cereal I bought, the kind of bread I chose. She would raise her eyebrows but say nothing, and I would pretend not to see it. That was the script I had rehearsed countless times. It was boring, predictable, almost safe. But the reality was different. Instead of the door swinging open, it clicked shut. Instead of laughter greeting me, it mocked me from behind the glass. Instead of cool air rushing out, the heat clung to my skin, heavy and suffocating. My son never came running. My husband never stood in the doorway with a half smile. And my mother-in-law? She was inside, holding the power to let me in or leave me out, and she made her choice. The driveway was quiet, except for the cicadas buzzing in the trees. A neighbor walked by with her dog, waved politely, and kept moving. I must have looked strange to her, sitting on the step with groceries scattered around me, my face carefully composed like nothing was wrong. That was the hardest part. Pretending that nothing was wrong while every part of me screamed otherwise. I wanted to believe it was an accident. That maybe she thought I had my own key. That maybe the lock had jammed. But I had lived with her long enough to know better. She never did anything by accident. Every gesture, every sigh, every carefully chosen word was deliberate. She could make cruelty sound like courtesy. She could make exclusion look like tradition. And yet, part of me still clung to the fantasy. The fantasy that when I finally got inside, I would laugh at myself for overreacting. That my son would tug at my sleeve, asking for the cookies I promised. That my husband would mutter an apology on her behalf, as if that excused anything. I thought I would unload the groceries, set the table, and we would eat dinner together like a family. That fantasy cracked the moment I heard the laughter from inside. Not just laughter, carefree, belly-deep laughter. The kind of sound that belongs to people who feel safe, comfortable, included. The kind of sound that told me I was not part of whatever joy was unfolding behind that locked door. I pressed my palm against the wood, felt the vibration of voices echoing through it. They were so close, just a few inches away, yet I had never felt further. I thought about knocking harder, demanding to be let in, forcing the confrontation. But that would have given her exactly what she wanted. A scene. A chance to call me dramatic, ungrateful, unstable. So I stayed still, quiet, a ghost on my own porch. It reminded me of another time, months earlier, Thanksgiving. I had spent hours roasting a turkey, basting it every 30 minutes, making sure the stuffing was just right. When I carried it into the dining room, My mother-in-law clapped her hands and announced, "Now, let's carve the one Dan brought from the store." She slid my turkey to the side, barely touched, and everyone nodded along as if that was normal. I smiled, sat down, and chewed on the silence. That was the pattern. Smile, swallow. Pretend it doesn't burn going down. Standing there with grocery bags cutting into my fingers, I realized I had rehearsed this part too. The disappointment, the sting, the forced composure. I had lived it so many times before that my body knew the routine better than my mind did. Heart heavy, breath shallow, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The performance of being fine. Still, there was a difference this time. The door was locked. A simple, physical barrier that carried all the weight of every unspoken insult, every exclusion, every dismissal. It was as if she had gathered them all into one sharp gesture and turned the key. I thought about my son again. What story would she tell him if he asked why I was outside? Would she say I was late, careless, forgetful? Would she tell him I preferred being alone? Children believe what they are told. They inherit not just our names, but our narratives. And I knew she was already writing mine, sentence by sentence, with each locked door, each missing chair, each absent gift. So I sat there, staring at the door, replaying the script in my head. The one I wanted, the one I deserved. Groceries on the counter, dinner on the table, laughter I could join instead of overhear. And then I compared it to the reality at my feet. Bags torn open, fruit rolling into the dirt, sweat soaking my shirt, my reflection caught in the glass like an intruder. Expectation versus reality. That was the story of my marriage. That was the story of my life in that house. And as I wiped my palms on my jeans, I felt something shift. Small, quiet, but irreversible. I stood up, picked up the bags, and whispered to myself, "This is the last time I wait outside." My voice was low, almost lost in the summer air, but it was real. It was mine. The house behind me erupted again in laughter, but this time I didn't flinch. I walked down the steps, set the groceries in the trunk of my car, and closed it gently. The sound was final, almost ceremonial. A different script was starting, one I hadn't rehearsed yet, and for the first time in a long time, I wanted to see how it would end. People often ask me how things got this way. How does a woman end up locked out of her own home by the very people she is supposed to call family? The truth is, it didn't happen overnight. It was a long story told in small humiliations, casual exclusions, and carefully chosen words that left bruises without ever raising a hand. When I first married my husband, I thought his mother was simply protective. That was the excuse everyone gave her. She had raised him mostly on her own after his father spent long years working out of state. She carried the weight of the household, or so the story went. I thought her sharp tone was just habit. I thought her constant criticism was her way of caring. She never said, "Welcome to the family." What she said instead was, "Don't think you're special." I laughed it off at first. You do that when you want to belong. You tell yourself she doesn't mean it, that it's cultural, generational, whatever excuse makes it easier to swallow. I brought her flowers, I learned her recipes, I even started drinking the same brand of tea she liked. She nodded sometimes, but never smiled. One of the first real cracks showed during our engagement party. My family flew in from 2 different states. They brought gifts, they toasted to our future. When it was her turn to speak, she raised her glass and said, "Let's hope she learns how to cook before the wedding." Everyone laughed. I laughed too, but my chest burned. That night, I stayed late to clean up, while she disappeared upstairs without a word. Then there was the baby shower. You would think that would be a celebration for me, but it wasn't. She turned it into a performance for herself. She invited her friends, filled the room with her stories, and introduced me not as the expectant mother, but as the girl who married my son. The gifts piled up around her, and when one guest handed me a present directly, she intercepted it, unwrapped it herself, and said, "Oh, this will be useful for when he visits Grandma." My hands stayed folded in my lap. My smile stayed fixed. Inside, something small cracked a little more. Later came the holidays, Thanksgiving again. I already told you about the turkey I cooked that ended up ignored, but it wasn't just that. That same night, when I tried to sit next to my husband, she patted the chair on the far side of the table and said, "Let him sit here by me. You'll understand. Everyone watched as I moved. My plate felt heavier than the food it carried. Christmas wasn't much better. She had stockings lined up above the fireplace, embroidered with names. My husband's, my son's, even the dog's, not mine. When I asked about it, she smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, I didn't think you'd want one. You're not really into decorations, are you?" I never asked again. People sometimes assume I must have fought back, that I must have screamed or argued. But that wasn't my style. I learned early on that reacting only gave her more power. So I stayed quiet. I told myself it was easier. That silence was strength. That one day she would see my patience and reward it. But silence is tricky. It doesn't shield you. It erases you. I think the moment I realized she saw me not as family, but as an outsider, came one summer afternoon when we all went to the park. I had packed sandwiches, fruit, and juice boxes. She had packed nothing. When my son reached for the food I prepared, she pulled him back gently and whispered, "Wait until we get home. Grandma will make you something better." He looked confused. I looked away. These things add up. They pile on top of each other until you can't tell where one slight ends and another begins. Being locked out with my groceries wasn't shocking on its own. It was the culmination of every time she had quietly told me I didn't belong. Every missing stocking, every stolen credit, every empty chair. I tried, believe me. I tried harder than anyone could have expected. I stayed up late helping with her garden, even though I'm allergic to half the flowers she planted. I drove her to doctor appointments when my husband was busy. I bought her favorite perfume for her birthday, only to hear her say she already had it, and watch her hand it to my sister-in-law instead. I wanted her approval so badly I kept offering pieces of myself until there was almost nothing left. But approval never came. Only the reminders. Subtle, sharp, constant. Family photo. "Why don't you take it for us, dear? We're having dinner out tonight, just the family. You don't mind staying with the kids, do you?" "Oh, you wouldn't understand. It's a family thing." Always the same word. Family. A word that included everyone but me. So when I stood on that porch with the key turning against me, I didn't just feel the sting of a single act. I felt the weight of years. I felt every door that had ever been closed, every curtain that had ever been drawn, every laugh that had ever been shared without me. And for the first time, I understood. It wasn't about me being late. It wasn't about groceries or noise or accidents. It was about erasure. She wanted me invisible. That realization was colder than the air conditioning I longed for inside. It sank into my bones, and once it did, I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't pretend anymore. That was the difference. Before, I had excuses. Now, I had clarity. When people ask me why I didn't leave earlier, I tell them this. You don't notice the water heating up until you're already boiling. And by the time you realize, you're too tired to jump out. But standing outside that door, with the heat pressing down and the laughter spilling through the walls, I finally noticed, and I decided I wasn't going to boil anymore. The heat that afternoon felt heavier than usual, as if the sun itself had decided to press down harder on my skin, just to see if I would break. My arms still tingled from the weight of the grocery bags, though I had already set them on the porch. The paper handles had left red lines across my palms. One of the bags had tipped on its side, and a bottle of iced tea rolled out, coming to rest against the welcome mat. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Welcome," printed neatly in cursive, right beneath my feet, while the people inside locked me out. The neighborhood was quiet. A lawnmower hummed somewhere down the street, the faint whiff of freshly cut grass drifting through the air. Birds chirped, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. Inside the house, the sound of plates clinking together floated out through the walls. I caught the smell of roasted chicken, herbs, maybe garlic bread. It was a smell that should have meant family. Instead, it meant exclusion. I stood there a moment longer, staring at the door. My reflection looked back at me in the glass pane. My hair plastered to my forehead, sweat trickling down the side of my face, eyes darker than usual. I almost didn't recognize myself, not because of how I looked, but because of how still I felt. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't pounding on the door. I was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that sits on top of a storm you know is coming. I reached down and picked up the iced tea, set it back into the bag, and straightened the handles like it mattered. Like order could disguise chaos. Then I lifted my hand and knocked again. Firm this time. Clear. The sound echoed into silence. No footsteps. No voices. Just silence. Until a laugh slipped through. Not a careless laugh this time, but a sharp one. Short. Almost like punctuation. I knew that laugh. It belonged to her. That was the moment. The drop that finally tipped the glass. My throat went dry. My hands tingled. My pulse pounded in my ears. For years, I had swallowed every slight, every insult, every exclusion. I had told myself patience was noble. I had told myself I was protecting peace. But what peace? Whose peace? Certainly not mine. I slid my hand into my purse, fingers brushing against the smooth edge of metal, the spare key. I had almost forgotten I kept it there. A secret insurance policy for a day like this. Though I never truly believed I would use it, my fingers closed around it. It felt heavier than it should, like it carried not just the weight of metal, but the weight of a decision. The key slid into the lock smoothly. Too smoothly. The click echoed in the quiet street. Louder in my ears than the mower. Louder than the cicadas. Louder than my own heartbeat. I pushed the door open slowly, deliberately, as if giving them one last chance to reveal this was all a joke. But the scene inside told me otherwise. The air conditioning hit me first. Cold, sharp, almost shocking after the heat. My skin prickled. The second thing was the smell. Food, dinner, plates already on the table, glasses filled, chairs full. Except one. My chair. The space where I should have been was empty. Not forgotten. Empty on purpose. My husband was mid-sentence when I walked in. His words cut off, his fork hovering over his plate. My sister-in-law glanced at me, and then quickly looked away, her face flushed. My father-in-law cleared his throat like that might fill the silence. And my mother-in-law, she smiled. That smile, thin, sharp, almost daring me to react. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't slam the door behind me. I simply stepped inside, closed the door with a soft click, and walked past them into the kitchen. I picked up the grocery bags, one by one, and placed them neatly on the counter. The eggs, the milk, the bread. I lined them up with care, my back straight, my hands steady. Then I turned around to face them. I went grocery shopping for all of us, I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. When I came back, the door was locked. The words landed heavy in the silence. My husband's fork clinked against his plate as he set it down. My sister-in-law shifted uncomfortably. My father-in-law rubbed the back of his neck. And my mother-in-law kept smiling, though it flickered for just a second, like a light bulb about to burn out. No one spoke. No one apologized. The silence stretched, pressing against the walls like another presence in the room. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed smooth. I wasn't asking for an explanation. I wasn't asking for excuses. I was stating a fact. A simple fact they could not deny. I poured myself a glass of water, the sound of liquid hitting the glass unnaturally loud. I took a sip, then set it down gently on the counter. My eyes never left hers. She blinked first. I walked toward the dining table, pulled out the empty chair, and sat down. Not with anger. Not with desperation. With quiet certainty. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. The kind that says, without words, that I was there to stay. The clinking of cutlery resumed slowly, hesitantly, as if nothing had happened. Conversation picked up again. Thinner this time, forced. But beneath it all was the crack. The crack that locking me out had created. They all felt it, even if they didn't admit it. Especially her. I didn't eat much. Just a few bites. Enough to make the act complete. Enough to show I wasn't leaving. I let the silence do the work for me. I let the truth of what they had done hang in the air, thick and undeniable. As I stood to leave the table, I placed my napkin neatly beside the plate and said, "Dinner smells good." My voice was soft, almost kind. Then I walked out of the dining room, not looking back. The sound that followed me wasn't laughter anymore. It was silence, heavy, uneasy. The kind of silence that doesn't end when the dishes are cleared. The kind that stays. What none of them realized was that I had already crossed a line. The moment I turned that spare key, something shifted. It wasn't just about getting inside the house. It was about stepping into a truth I could no longer ignore. They had locked me out once, but in doing so, they had unlocked something in me. And once something is unlocked, there is no going back. The chair creaked softly as I pulled it out. That empty chair they had so carefully left untouched. I lowered myself into it, slow and deliberate, and the scrape of wood against tile was louder than any shout could have been. Every fork at the table froze mid-air. Every pair of eyes landed on me. The room was thick with silence, except for the steady hum of the air conditioner. I placed my napkin neatly on my lap. My hands didn't tremble. My face was calm, almost casual, as if nothing about this moment was unusual. Inside, though, the storm roared. My pulse was hammering in my ears. My throat felt tight, but I forced my voice out anyway. "I went shopping for all of us," I said. My tone was measured, even polite. And when I came back, the door was locked. The words hung there, heavy, undeniable. My husband looked down at his plate, pushing a piece of chicken around with his fork, as if it might give him an answer. My sister-in-law shifted in her seat, her eyes darting between me and her mother. My father-in-law cleared his throat again, the same way he always did when tension filled the room, like the sound alone might erase conflict. And then there was her, my mother-in-law. Sitting straight, her posture perfect, her fingers wrapped around her wineglass, she smiled, thin and sharp, the kind of smile that hides daggers. "Oh, that must have been a mistake," she said finally. Her voice dripped with false sweetness. "Sometimes the lock sticks. You know how old this house is." Her words floated in the air, flimsy excuses dressed as concern. I held her gaze. I didn't blink. "It didn't stick," I replied softly. "It turned." Her smile faltered, just for a second, before she recovered. "You must be tired from the heat. Why don't you freshen up before dinner?" There it was. The dismissal. The attempt to brush it aside, to move past it as if it hadn't happened. As if I would accept scraps of courtesy in place of the truth. "I'm fine," I said. I picked up my fork, speared a piece of potato, and chewed slowly. The scrape of my fork against the plate sounded like thunder in the silence. The conversation at the table stumbled forward after that, forced and shallow. My father-in-law asked about the weather. My sister-in-law mentioned a show she was watching. My husband murmured something about work. But every word was brittle. Every sentence broke in the air. And through it all, my mother-in-law kept that smile. Watching me, testing me, waiting for me to crack. I didn't. I sat tall, every movement deliberate. I took small bites, sipped water, kept my face calm. I let the silence do the talking for me. Finally, I set my fork down and looked at her directly. "I used my spare key," I said. My voice was soft, almost conversational, but every word carried weight. "I didn't want to stay outside all afternoon. That wouldn't have been very family-like, would it?" The word landed like a stone in water. Family. Her word. Her favorite weapon. For years she had used it to push me out, to remind me I was not included. Now I handed it back to her, sharp and unwrapped. Her hand tightened around the stem of her glass. "Of course you're family," she said, her voice too bright. "Why would you even think otherwise?" I leaned back in my chair, my eyes never leaving hers. "Because doors don't lock themselves. People lock them." The air was heavy now, suffocating. My husband shifted uncomfortably, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth. He didn't defend me. He didn't defend her. He said nothing, which in some ways was worse. Silence as loyalty. Silence as permission. My son peeked around the corner from the living room where he had been playing, his eyes wide, his small hands clutching a toy car. He didn't understand, not fully, but he felt it. Children always feel it. Our words might be coded, our tones disguised, but they know. They always know. I forced a smile for him, softening my voice. "Go on, sweetheart. Play." He nodded and disappeared again, the car rattling against the floorboards. I turned back to the table. "I just wanted to be clear," I said. "If you want me gone, say it. Don't hide behind locks and curtains." No one spoke. Not a word. My sister-in-law's fork clattered against her plate as her hand slipped. My father-in-law rubbed his temple. My husband shifted again but still said nothing. And my mother-in-law. She held my gaze, but her smile was gone now, replaced with something tighter, harder. "You're being dramatic," she said finally. Her voice was cold. "It was nothing. Don't ruin dinner over nothing." I stood slowly, pushing the chair back into place. "If it was nothing," I said, "then why does it feel like everything?" The words dropped like stones. No one moved. No one breathed. I picked up my water glass, finished it in one sip, and set it back down gently. Then I walked away from the table, the silence trailing after me like a shadow. Behind me, I heard my husband whisper something. I didn't catch the words. Maybe it was my name. Maybe it was an apology too soft to matter. I didn't look back. Not yet. Not when the air was still thick with the truth no one dared to speak. The thing about silence is that it doesn't erase what happened. It amplifies it. Every bite they took after I left tasted of that silence. Every laugh they forced sounded brittle. And every time her hand touched that wine glass, she felt the weight of the lock she had turned. What none of them realized in that moment was that the balance had shifted. For years I had been the one outside, knocking, waiting, hoping. But now, I had walked inside on my own terms. And once you stop waiting for someone to open the door, you see them differently. That night, sitting at the edge of the bed long after the dishes had been cleared, I realized something important. They hadn't locked me out to punish me. They had locked me out because they were afraid. Afraid of me sitting at that table. Afraid of the space I claimed simply by existing. And fear, once revealed, never goes back into hiding. The house was quieter after dinner. Too quiet. The kind that doesn't feel peaceful but heavy, like dust settling after something breaks. Plates had been cleared, glasses stacked in the sink, but no one had dared to speak more than a handful of words. Every sound was sharp in that silence. The clink of silverware, the faint hum of the dishwasher, the creak of the stairs as someone shifted upstairs. I sat in the living room for a while, my glass of water still half full on the coffee table. The ice had melted, leaving a thin film of condensation that spread across the wood. I traced it with my finger absent-mindedly. My reflection in the glass of the television stared back at me, pale and steady. For once, I didn't feel like a guest in my own house. I felt like an observer, watching them scramble in the wake of their own choices. My husband lingered in the doorway. He opened his mouth a few times, as if searching for words, but nothing came. He finally muttered, "It was just a mistake," before disappearing upstairs. His voice didn't convince even himself. I heard the floorboards creak under his steps, then the click of a door shutting. Left alone, I leaned back against the couch and let the air conditioner wash over me. It was cold, almost too cold, and it reminded me of how it felt when I first stepped back inside earlier that evening. The shock of it, the way my skin reacted. But now, instead of bracing against it, I let it seep in. The truth is, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned hot on the porch, in the sun, when the laughter from inside pierced me like needles. But now it had burned out, leaving something sharper, calmer, clarity. I saw the pattern, the years of small humiliations that led to this locked door. And I realized it wasn't just about being shut outside. It was about the quiet agreement that I was never supposed to fully be inside. I thought about all the times I had laughed it off. The Christmas stocking that never bore my name. The Thanksgiving turkey pushed aside. The baby shower where my gifts were intercepted. Each moment felt small on its own, but together they formed a wall. And tonight, that wall had finally become visible. A lock, a key, and me standing on the wrong side of it. The strange thing was, I didn't feel powerless anymore. Sitting there with the hum of the dishwasher in the background, I felt something I hadn't in years. Control. Not because I had forced them to apologize. They hadn't. Not because anyone had admitted they were wrong. They wouldn't. But because I had walked inside anyway. Because I had sat down at that table without asking. Because I had said the words out loud, stripped them of their excuses, and left them in silence. Later that night, as I carried the groceries to the fridge, I noticed the eggs were cracked. 2 of them had shattered when the bag hit the porch. I held the carton in my hands and stared at the mess. It felt symbolic, something fragile, broken under pressure. I thought about throwing it out, but instead, I placed the carton carefully on the top shelf, cracks and all. Sometimes broken things deserve to take up space too. When I finally went upstairs, the hallway was dark. My son was asleep, his toy car clutched in his small hand. I kissed the top of his head and lingered there, breathing in the simple innocence of him. He didn't know yet about the games adults play, about the doors they lock, the curtains they draw. I wondered how long I could shield him from it. In the bedroom, my husband pretended to sleep. His body turned away from me, shoulders stiff. I didn't disturb him. I climbed into bed, pulled the blanket up, and stared at the ceiling. The air felt heavy, but my chest didn't. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying their silence for them. They could carry it themselves. As the night stretched on, I thought about what would come next. Would she try again, in some new way, to push me out? Probably. Would my husband continue to stand in the middle, saying nothing, hoping the tension would dissolve on its own? Almost certainly. But something had shifted in me. I wasn't waiting outside anymore. Morning would come, and the house would wake with the usual routines. Coffee brewing, dishes clattering, footsteps on the stairs. But no matter what they did, the image of me sitting outside on the porch with groceries scattered around my feet would linger. It wasn't just in my memory. It was in theirs too. A truth they couldn't erase. I don't know what she thought when she turned that key. Maybe she believed it was power. Maybe she thought it was victory. But when I opened the door with my own key, when I sat down in the chair she left empty, she lost something she didn't even realize she had been holding. The illusion that she controlled who belonged. I don't know if she recognized it then. Maybe she still hasn't. Maybe she never will. But I felt it. The lock she had turned wasn't just on the door. It was on the story she had been writing about me for years. And tonight, I had unlocked it. As I drifted off to sleep, the last thought that crossed my mind was simple. She had locked me out of the house, but in doing so, she had unlocked something else entirely. And I wasn't sure she would ever recover from that.